Hi everyone, today I'm going to be looking at some of the do's and don'ts of landscape photography. Some hints and tips, some things to do, some things not to do. Well, location is everything in landscape photography. You've got to have a good location, but it doesn't mean you have to have the ideal location. You don't have to go to the Lake District, you don't have to go to the Isle of Skye, you don't have to go to Iceland. You can take really good landscape pictures right on your own doorstep. Today I've come to my local patch, just half an hour from home, overlooking one of the reservoirs that are situated here in South Yorkshire. It's not the perfect view, but it's a nice view and it makes a good landscape image. You can take all the techniques you practice here in your local area and then put them into practice for when you're in a better location. So remember, keep it local, keep it real. I really shouldn't do that, should I? Well, composition is key to any landscape photograph and it can make or break an image. But when you're setting your camera up, don't automatically grab your widest lens. Often see landscape photographs taken in the full view with an ultra wide zoom. It's just not needed. There's not many landscapes that can take that kind of wide view. My most used landscape lens is a 24mm equivalent. I find that works for 90% of the time. I often go a bit tighter, I have to go a bit wider, but in most cases that's wide enough. And don't just think you could crop in later either. Try to get it right in camera. Try to frame up your shot so it's as perfect as can be. As I say, I'm using a 24mm wide angle equivalent. That's just the only prime lens I've got today, and that's ideal for doing this shot. So just because you're into landscape photography, don't think you need to have a bag full of lenses to get great pictures. That kit lens that came with your camera, it's more than ideal. But when you are setting up your composition, think about how you're going to build up the image and build up the scene. A good composition usually consists of a foreground, midground and a background. Think of it like a journey through the picture. You're taking the viewer through a journey through the picture. Build up the picture for them to see, and if you've got a good foreground, then use it. Now, the default metering on most digital cameras is the matrix metering, otherwise known as evaluative metering. But it's not the only metering mode that your camera may have. Others may be center weighted metering, partial metering, or even spot metering. Now, have you ever tried any of those? Have you switched over to partial metering and tried using that? It's a more accurate way of reading the scene and can help in difficult lighting conditions. In landscape photography, you can take a reading off a mid-tone, such as the grass, and then work your exposure around that. So if you are just using matrix metering and the histogram, try out some of those other exposure modes. That way you'll learn about exposure, you'll learn about metering, and you'll learn about light. All key techniques. Now, if you want all of your landscape image to be nice and sharp from front to back, foreground to background, you're going to need to know about depth of field. Now, you probably know that small apertures equal more depth of field, but you can maximize that depth of field by focusing in the right area. So don't just focus on the furthest subject, infinity with your camera lens. You need to focus a third of the way into the picture to maximize depth of field at whatever aperture you're using. So you can either do this by imagining a third of the way into the picture, or you can look through your viewfinder and focus a third of the way up the frame. So on this view, I'll be focusing a point just on those area of grass, just the other side of my main bit of foreground. I don't want to focus on the background there because the depth of field will not reach the wall, and I don't actually want to focus on the wall because the depth of field won't probably reach to the distant hills in the distance there. So on this scene, I can move my focusing square to a third of the way into the picture, zoom in and make sure that that is nicely focused. And then I can bring the focusing point down to my nearest subject, again zoom in and press my depth of field preview button, and by pressing that I can go to the aperture that I'll be shooting at, which is f8, and I can see that that is coming in nicely into focus. I can then go up to my distant view and distant subject and again press the depth of field preview button, and I can see that everything is nice in focus when the aperture is shut down to f8. But if you ever tried shooting your landscapes wide open at your lens's maximum aperture, just focus on the foreground subject, compose as you normally would, It's amazing the sense of depth you get within a picture without having that great depth of field. Give it a try. My next do or don't is probably more of a personal one than any sort of guideline. If you've seen any of my pictures before, you probably see that I don't shoot sunset or sunrise very much. They really don't appeal to me. I'd much rather shoot once the sun's up or just before the sun has set. I see sunrises and sunsets as a bit more of a glory thing. It kind of distracts from the main landscape that you're shooting. They're all a bit easy to do, they can make your pictures look wonderful, but they kind of take the spotlight away from the main landscape you're shooting, and then it's all about the sky. I'd much rather shoot with direct light on the landscape. So for landscape photography, I either shoot with the sun off to my left or right for side lighting, or I do look into the light, but probably not for that sunset shot. So this view I've got today, I'm looking southeast, I'm looking over the reservoir, and the sun is going to be setting off to my right hand side. So from now until sunset I've got nice side lighting, which is ideal for this kind of landscape and ideal for many landscapes. So it's my preferred choice rather than sunset. So I'm not saying don't shoot at sunset, but there are other options. Now filters are essential for landscape photography. It's very rare that you'll see a scene that doesn't need a filter and doesn't need the exposure balancing between the sky and the land. So it's more than likely you'll be either using the polarizer or a grad filter. So on a day like today, the polarizer is probably going to be the ideal filter where there's no cloud in the sky at the moment, and that will really boost the colour of that blue sky up there. On other days it'll be the grad filter, and if you just buy one grad filter, go for a 2-stop model and probably a hard grad. That's going to be the most versatile to use, and if you're shooting like I am here with the sun off to your side for side lighting, which is, as I say, ideal for landscape photography, then a 2-stop grad is usually enough, and that's usually the exposure difference between the sky and the land when the sun is off to your side. Now of course you may be thinking you don't really need filters with digital photography these days. You could exposure blend and do it all on the computer. Yes, that's true, but for me landscape photography is all about being out in the landscape. So I want to get everything right in camera, be that the composition, the exposure, or the balance of the exposure using filters. I don't want to be doing multiple shots and blending them together on the computer. I'd rather spend time getting it right, enjoying being out here, enjoying my photography out here. The thing is, I've spent money on my cameras and on my lenses and all my other accessories, so the filter is just another accessory that is part of my kit. It may be an old school way of thinking, but for me photography is about getting shots within camera, not on the PC. So for landscape photography, the most useful filters are the grad filter and the polarizer, but there is another filter, the standard ND filter, popular such as the big stopper, which is useful in some circumstances. So you often see them used on a day like this where there's no cloud in the sky, perhaps you have got some water in the shot, and so you automatically go for your ND filter to try and blur the shot, but I think unless it's really adding something to the picture, these are best left for those occasions where it will work properly. Now do invest in a good solid tripod. Buy the most solid and heavy one you can afford and carry, but obviously don't buy one so heavy that you end up just leaving it in the car. A good solid tripod in the landscape will be invaluable on a breezy day. And don't worry about having the latest camera with tons of megapixels. Any camera will do. I could have shot this view with my iPhone, but obviously the OMD gives me a bit more flexibility. So just enjoy the camera you've got and just learn to use it within the landscape. And the same goes for lenses. Don't worry too much about quality. Just buy the best you can afford and just go out and use it. Do you know the most important thing about landscape photography? It's what's behind the camera. You.